Thank you, Brian. As I begin, let me give a proper introduction. This is Ms. Alicia, AKA Lolly Mazursky. She is my Chief of Staff and Associate Vice President for Policy and Planning. So you see, I have very high-level help here tonight. Well, thank all of you for coming. Good evening. And to all of the Boeing employees here this evening, I congratulate you for being recognized as men and women well prepared to take on even greater challenges than you already have. And to any and all of the Rensselaer alumni and alumnae who have joined us, let me thank you for coming. Now, Boeing is one of the top recruiters of the students that we educate and graduate at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and we always are gratified when our graduates decide to come to the Boeing company, because that means that they are fully engaged in changing the world, and I do mean that. Now, I know that the Boeing Leadership Center often uses a variant of the Socratic method to teach leadership, promoting critical thinking by posing searching questions. Now, I will have a little bit more to say in a few moments, about asking the right questions, but I thought I would forewarn you, I am from the university, that after I tell you a little bit about my own career trajectory in the context that you're here, I am going to ask you a particular question, so I'll tell you ahead of time. And so that question is, what moment in your career thus far has demanded the greatest degree of personal resilience? What moment in your career thus far has demanded the greatest degree of personal resilience? And how can you apply the flexibility and strength that you demonstrated in that instance to the challenges and opportunities you may face in the next steps in your career? Now, just as Boeing builds resilience into its aircraft, its systems, and services, resilience is probably the single greatest requirement, and I know there are many attributes that you all discussed, but this is what my perspective is possibly the single greatest requirement after integrity in high-level careers, which do not, in general, follow linear paths, although when people talk about successful careers and look back, it may look relatively linear, but that's typically not the case. And even in those rare professions with ladder-like hierarchies, there inevitably is unexpected challenge or adversity to be overcome. There are surprises that accompany sudden shifts in vision and difficult choices to be made, so resilience is necessary. But if you will, I'll take a few moments to tell you a bit about some of my own lessons in resilience, particularly as it relates to flexibility and strength. Now, I'm a theoretical physicist. I have a bachelor's degree in physics and a Ph.D. in elementary particle physics, both from MIT. And my career trajectory, as Mark has said, Brian rather, has followed an arc through positions in academia, government, not as a politician, industry, and research. But my path began with my parents. My mom just passed away this summer at the age of 100. So my path began with my parents, who really were my role models, who emphasized excellence and hard work and prepared me to take advantages of opportunities that came my way with the convergence of two historical events. The first was the desegregation of the Washington, D.C. public schools, the year after the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, which guaranteed that I could attend better schools with excellent teachers, with more competition, and with a diverse student body, right in my own neighborhood. Before then, I had to pass the schools that were closest. The second event occurred 2 years later when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite. And as you may know, this also launched the space race. But importantly, it spurred the United States to a new emphasis on mathematics and science. And that was reflected in the public schools, and I benefited tremendously from that, because I ended up in an accelerated program where I finished high school essentially a year early, although I did stay around to take some advanced courses. And so a particular window in the history of our nation had opened up for me, the first of a number of such windows in my career. And I was willing and importantly able to step through it. I called it stepping through my window in time. And we all have our windows in time. Now, and the point here is that successful career trajectories involve being keenly attuned to such openings, whether their context is personal or corporate or national or global. And my father always taught me that it is important to do as well as you can in the job you're in, to achieve excellence, and then to be able to take advantage of surprising turns or the coalescence of unexpected factors into a paradigm shift, to be able to find the opportunities within them, to optimize them, to achieve results, and then to move through them. Soon the opportunities that I was afforded, my own interests, which were in math and science, and of course, academic success, led me to MIT. Now, there were challenges there. I'm only, from another century. An interesting time. And there were challenges there, to be sure, as I was one of only 2 African-American women in my freshman class at MIT. And some of the professors and students were not always welcoming to me. It's just a fact. But I realized early on that I was faced with a choice, whether to give in to ignorance or to pursue excellence. And I chose the latter, always remembering what my parents had taught all of their children. And in fact, whenever I have encountered such obstacles along the way, I've always tried to remain tenacious in pursuit of excellence. Now, since I was interested most in the theoretical and mathematical aspects of physics, I decided that I would be a theoretical physicist. And when I was a senior at MIT, deciding where to attend graduate school, the University of Pennsylvania invited me to visit. And one of the physicists, who was actually a Nobel Prize winner, whose work most interested me, was at Penn. But it was an interesting time, and as I was leaving Penn that day in April, in a car with my sorority sister, on my way to the Philadelphia airport, the radio broadcast was interrupted, and we learned that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot and later died. And so I was a child of the King era, and so we nearly ran the car off the road. But by the time I got back to MIT, inspired by the courage of Dr. King, I knew that I would actually remain at MIT for graduate school, because it was the place where I felt that I would have the greatest possible opportunity to change things for the better. And of course, MIT had excellent physics graduate programs. So in an interesting and in a way born of tragedy, another window had opened for me. Because MIT needed more minority students for its own sake and indeed for the sake of the nation. So with a group of like-minded students, I formed the Black Students Union. And we presented 10 proposals to the MIT administration. We called them demands at the time. But they were proposals. So then Provost Paul Gray, who later became president of MIT, who actually is one of my best friends, listened and formed a task force on educational opportunity, and he asked me to join it, which I did. Now, I could regale you with stories about hot meetings, not as in temperature, about many difficult discussions. But in the end, the task force accomplished a great deal, and MIT began to more assiduously recruit minority students and initiated a 6-week summer program called Project Interphase that helped to prepare incoming minority freshmen for the rigorous coursework that they would encounter. And soon the program was actually open to all who could benefit from it. And though I was still a student, a graduate student at that point, I was asked to design and be the head of the physics curriculum, which I did. So another kind of leadership transition. Now, the African American and other students that I helped to bring to MIT, and we began to shift our focus, particularly as it related to women, and helped to adjust to its culture, excelled. And they proved to the world that scientific and engineering talent is not restricted to one race or one sex or one story of origin. Now, this experience was one of my first real exercises in leadership tied to real-world challenges, keenly attuned to policy in this case within a higher education context, and to questions of science, technology, and teaching and learning. But interestingly enough, in remaining at MIT for graduate school, I changed my focus from condensed matter physics, which was my original interest, where MIT was not as active at that time, to nuclear and high energy physics, also known as elementary particle physics. And after obtaining my Ph.D. in particle physics, I was fortunate to spend 2 postdoctoral years at the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory in Illinois. And in between those 2 years, I received a fellowship, 2 actually, from the Ford Foundation and from the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or CERN. So I spent a year at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, where I not only furthered my research interests in theoretical high-energy physics, but also gained, importantly, the invaluable perspective of having lived abroad. And so I returned home with a much broadened worldview. Now, there was a hidden message in what I said, which is that I've always been interested in broader issues, but I always focused on doing as good a job as I could in what I was there to do. And so I switched back to my first love, which was theoretical condensed matter physics. But because I was trained in particle physics, it wasn't exactly what my next employer did, but that employer would hire people, if they thought that they were smart enough and could make that transition. So I landed what was called a limited term appointment at the Great Bell Labs in New Jersey, which over its history, as you may know, has cultivated 14 Nobel Prize winners, I'm not one of them, among its researchers. And my position became permanent a year later. And that's because I had a number of successes at Bell Labs, developing theories to explain things like charge density waves in layered transition metal dichalcogenides. There'll be a test at the end. The polaronic aspects of electrons on the surface of liquid helium films. That'll be in the pop quiz. And the optical and electronic properties of layered materials, particularly so-called strain layer superlattices. Now, because of this research, I achieved some recognition within the greater community of scientists and was elected a fellow of the American Physical Society, as well as the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. But after 15 years of research at Bell Labs, I realized that I wanted to teach and mentor students. And I was married and I had a young child at the time, so I wasn't looking to go far. And so when Rutgers University offered me a position as a tenured full professor of physics, I took it. But my interest in science and public policy drew me as well to a variety of state and professional advisory boards. In New Jersey, I in fact held 3 non-paid gubernatorial appointments for 3 different governors, including an appointment by Governor Tom Kean to the New Jersey Commission on Science and Technology, which was formed to make investments in areas of science and technology that were deemed to be important to the New Jersey economy. And so this kind of service, in addition to my actual scientific background, led President Bill Clinton in 1995 to ask me to become the chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which, as you may know, licenses, regulates, and safeguards the use of nuclear reactors, nuclear materials, and nuclear waste. In fact, the NRC does safety reviews for the nuclear navy, for nuclear-powered ships. It also is involved in things having to do with the peaceful uses of nuclear energy worldwide, including things that relate to nuclear nonproliferation. So we did a lot of work with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. But I had to step away from my tenured academic position for this role, which required some temerity. And suddenly, I had responsibility for an organization that regulated and oversaw a multi-$100 billion set of industries, set of enterprises, at a time of growing public concerns about the safety of nuclear power, especially in the aftermath of the accidents at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in 1979, and especially at the Soviet Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986 in the Ukraine. And in fact, one of my first trips abroad was to Chernobyl. So my mother lived to be 100, so I'm hoping to get to 95. Because I figured it took 5 years off my life. And so that was a transformative experience for me, coupled with the fact that within my first year, the NRC was the cover story for Time magazine called Blowing the Whistle on Nuclear Safety. And this was something that I had not anticipated. It had to do with some things that had happened before I came to the agency, but I owned it because I was the leader. So I recognized that the NRC needed to reaffirm its fundamental health and safety mission, enhance its regulatory effectiveness, and position itself for change, because the nuclear industry was changing. Things were happening globally that affected the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So I held public meetings, listened to community concerns. I had roundtables with the nuclear industry itself. We had CEOs, NRC commissioners, interveners, all in the same room around the table. And so in the end then, using that approach, I was able to lead the development of a strategic plan for the NRC, believe it or not, its first ever. So that taught me to never underestimate the power of a vision and of a plan to inspire the people you manage toward important goals and to get people moving in the same direction. And in fact, this plan put the NRC on a more business-like footing through a process that we created called PBPM, which simply stands for Planning, Budgeting, and Performance Management. And so it linked what we did to our strategies, which linked to the fundamental goals, and it linked the performance of leaders in the organization to, in fact, the performance. They had personal goals, but there were ones that related to how they did their jobs. But in this case, if you think about it, their jobs extended to how well the nuclear industry performed. So it was pretty stringent. And this planning, budgeting, and performance management, or PBPM as we called it, actually still exists, even though this was done about 20 years ago. But it also, and you could say that is what helped to position the NRC for change. But we also introduced an approach to regulation at the NRC that used probabilistic risk assessment on a more consistent basis and integrated it with more engineering-oriented approaches and what we call risk-informed performance-based regulation. And that meant that we were becoming more focused and consistent in how we regulated the industry so that it would be neither what some people refer to as good guy regulation or bad guy regulation. You know, good guy regulation meaning that if I know you, I like you, you're a good guy, so I might give you a break. But if you were a bad guy, or I thought you were, then I would never give you a break. So the issue was to be consistent, but to have a basis because of the sensitivity of the nuclear enterprises to have a rigorous approach to how we did that. And that's what we did with risk-informed performance-based regulation and created a new reactor oversight program, which still exists today. And so that had a lot to do with improving the regulatory effectiveness of the NRC. And by being consistent, it was by definition a reaffirmation of the agency's commitment to its public health and safety mission, but to fairness to those we regulate. And in fact, risk-informed regulation influenced the nuclear codes and standards of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, the AMSE, and informed the nuclear regulatory programs of other nations. And after meeting early in my tenure at the NRC with senior nuclear regulatory counterparts from around the world, under the aegis of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the OECD, Nuclear Energy Agency, I saw another window of opportunity, the need for international cooperation among regulators to avoid disasters such as Chernobyl in the future, to harmonize within the sovereignty of independent nations our regulatory approaches. And so I was able to spearhead the formation of the International Nuclear Regulators Association, the INRA, as a forum to allow nations to assist each other in promoting nuclear safety. And the initial membership comprised Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Spain, Sweden, the UK, and the US. And that organization still exists, and it has been expanded to include South Korea, with China as an observer. And I was able and privileged to be the first chairman of the group for 2 years. Now, because of these experiences and my earlier experiences, I understood that to accomplish national goals many times, I had to think globally as well. And I'm certain that that ideal is well ingrained in the Boeing culture. Now, then 4 years later, this is how I came to where I am. Another unforeseen opportunity arose and another decision point for me when I was asked to assume the presidency of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Rensselaer, which is where I am now. I was asked that by the Board of Trustees. And the reason it was a decision point was that I was also asked to continue as chairman of the NRC, but I felt and saw that I could help Rensselaer, I believe, to reach its real promise and live up to its legacy, to become a world-class technological research university with truly global reach and global impact. Now, I was well aware, because I was what was called a Rensselaer medalist when I was in high school, I was well aware that Rensselaer had a rich, rich history of producing outstanding graduates who helped to build this country and influence the world. In fact, I mentioned the impact of the space program in my life. Well, it turns out that one of my predecessors as president of Rensselaer ran the Apollo program. And you can look him up. His name is George Lowe. He's also a Rensselaer grad. And so I felt that even with that history, that Rensselaer could go further. But I also knew that the people that I led would need to reimagine their own domains to reach the goals we had set and to step through windows in time of their own. So I posed 5 rather piercing questions to the Rensselaer community in my inaugural address. And I'll tell you what they were. First, what defines the intellectual core in key disciplines at Rensselaer? Second, in those disciplines, are we in a leadership position? Third, if we are not in a leadership position, do we have the underlying strengths and capabilities necessary to move rapidly into a position of primacy with the proper focus and investment? Fourth, are there areas that are so vital and so important that we must create a presence in them in order to stand in the community of world-class universities? Now, I suggested, in fact, 3 such areas, 2 of which were existing strengths, but one of which needed some tweaking, information technology, and the other was applied mathematics, and one of which, biotechnology, represented an entirely new direction for Rensselaer, and one that I knew I would have work to do with Rensselaer alums. But then the final question was, what areas of current endeavor must we be willing to transform or to give up in order to focus our resources and our energies to create the impact we envision? Now remember, university is a little different than a corporation. So posing questions and asking people to help to answer them is really important and vital. And by posing such fundamental questions to the people and the portfolios at Rensselaer, I was able to encourage both our academic leaders and our administrative leaders to think critically about their missions and to focus on the right goals. So I call it, setting off, creating a pathway with boundary conditions. And one could bounce around along that path, but it was setting a broad direction. And we used to refer to it as crossing the North Atlantic, but where we were building the ship and the crew at the same time. But I promised that together, the Rensselaer community would develop a plan. We called it simply the Rensselaer Plan, to answer these questions, to steer our choices, and always to focus us on choosing excellence. And so the Rensselaer plan, approved by our Board of Trustees in May of 2000, I started in July of 1999, indeed did lay out what we felt were answers to these questions. In fact, and the way we wrote it is that it included more than 140 commitments. So we didn't write it as we should or we could or it would be nice to. We call them we will statements because we said we will do such and such. Now the document, frankly, was one of sheer resolve, but it propelled us to where we intended to go. And guided by that plan, and now the Plan 2.0, which we refer to as the Rensselaer Plan 2024, because it will take the university to its 200th anniversary. We've put into place the people, the programs, the platforms, and the partnerships that have sparked quite a change, a renaissance at Rensselaer. And our campus has been transformed by state-of-the-art research platforms that include the Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies. And we try to build aesthetics into what we design for functionality. The Curtis R. Priam Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, which is both a world-class performance platform and a very high-end research center. And the Center for Computational Innovations, which houses actually the most powerful supercomputer at an American private university. It is a petascale computer. And we, in fact, partner with the Lawrence Livermore National Labs in supporting corporate industrial uses of that kind of computational power. And of course, we use it for our own research. And speaking of that research, we prepared the Institute for leadership in areas of research that we believe are of fundamental significance in the 21st century by focusing on what we call signature thrusts in computational science and engineering. So we didn't want to just show you the computer. People talk about the internet, but this is the real internet. In computational science and engineering, in biotechnology and the life sciences, in nanotechnology and advanced materials, in energy, the environment, and smart systems, including, smart facades, and in media, arts, science, and technology. This is inside the Impact Center, the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, brain control movement. Now, young people have seen what we do, and so the number of students applying to join the freshman class has well more than tripled over the last decade, as has our sponsored research and associated expenditures. And so we've enrolled about 1,400 brilliant freshmen this year. We have hired over 330, probably over 350, I've lost count, new tenure-track faculty members, including star faculty as part of what we call constellations of senior and junior faculty and students in promising areas of multidisciplinary research. And we do it to create critical mass in these areas. And that includes biotechnology and the life sciences, computational science and engineering, broadly writ, including data science, and in media arts, science, and technology. And these investments have both elevated our profile as a major technological research university and strengthened both our undergraduate and graduate curricula with new degree programs and new academic concentrations. But building on our successes, because we spent a lot of time transforming the university, today we're moving from continuing to transform Rensselaer, which we will always be doing, to being more transformative in the world at large. Now, obviously, I did not develop the Rensselaer plan or its follow-on all by myself, because it definitely takes a village. But there's no question that the vision to develop and realize our plan has been informed by the things I've been privileged to do, including the leadership roles I've had across a broad spectrum, and includes things that I'm engaged in today. So I'll tell you a little bit about them, because it leads to a kind of question that people ask me all the time. So in 2009, President Barack Obama appointed me to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, or PCAST, that looks at important areas of research that are important to the country. And remember, I told you about my experience on the New Jersey Commission on Science and Technology. So that is PCAST, as you see it in the picture there. And I served there for over 5 years. And then Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, when she was the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, asked that I serve on a bipartisan national commission for the review of the research and development programs of the intelligence community. And I did that for about 2.5 years. And that experience, among others, led once again to the president asking me in 2014 to serve as co-chair of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. It's the follow-on of what used to be called PIFIAB, the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. And that board assesses issues pertaining to the quantity, quality, and adequacy of intelligence activities, and the performance of all agencies of the federal government engaged in the collection, the evaluation, the production of intelligence, and the execution of intelligence policy. Now I can look at your faces. Now, as you can imagine, this is a very sensitive role at a very sensitive and complex time for our government, for our businesses, and indeed for our nation and the world. And that's why I do it. Because if a president, any president, asks one to do something like this, feels that one can make a contribution, then one does it. Now, I also do some other things for the government, even though government is a dirty word, but the government does very important things, and you guys do a lot of business with the government. And so, I also serve on the U.S. Department of State International Security Advisory Board and the U.S. Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, and all these things dovetail. So I might as well tell you the rest. Okay, I'm giving you a walk through my resume, but I'm trying to have you understand me and how I lead. So I'm actually vice chair of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution. I'm ending a term as a trustee of the Brookings Institution, a member of the board of the Council on Foreign Relations, and actually a member of the board of the World Economic Forum, USA. And I'm a life trustee of my alma mater, MIT. But I also have the privilege of serving on the board of some leading corporations, among them IBM, Medtronic, Public Service Enterprise Group, and FedEx. In an earlier stage, I was a director of New York Stock Exchange, NYSE Euronext, and I was chair of the NYSE Regulation Board for 7 years, and a former governor of FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Now, but all along, I've been engaged, and I always focused, especially early, on my basic research and then the issues of the nexus of science and technology. And so I've been able to garner some professional achievements and recognition, and I'm a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering, the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK, fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and I was actually president of the AAAS and former chair of its board. And that's the largest general scientific society in the world. So I often am asked, here's the obvious question, so this is one you might have asked me. how can you do all of this? First of all, how can you do it, period? And how can you do it and run a major technological research university? Well, my response is this. And remember, we all have different careers. How could I not do it? Because in addition to my fundamental belief in service in the way I described, being co-chair of Ph.D., being on the board of IBM, being involved with the World Economic Forum. These things, interestingly enough, play off of each other. So if I asked you a question of what do IBM and FedEx have in common, what would you tell me? Someone said something. Exactly. Information technology, and data. So when I talked about computational science and engineering, we do high-performance computing, information technology, and data science, data analytics. Big thing at the university. If I asked you what Medtronic and FedEx have in common, what would you say? Same thing is part of the answer. Information technology, data, networks, and supply chain. This is stuff we do at the university. So in the end, it is essential to the successful leadership of a technological research university to actually develop a sense of where the greatest challenges are globally, across multiple sectors, especially multiple economic sectors, to know which windows are opening or closing, and which forces are coalescing in many different contexts. So I could ask you one more time, what does Ph.D. and IBM have in common? Or Boeing? You've already given me the answer. Data, modeling and simulation, geopolitics. I could go on. And so the perspective, which for me has been pretty panoramic, that I gained from these affiliations helped me to anticipate the future for which we need to prepare as a university to focus our research, but most importantly, to better understand how to prepare the next generation of leaders. That's what we do in the end. We're in the human capital business. And we intend to graduate leaders. And so as we see it at Rensselaer, two factors define this moment in time. First, humanity faces increasingly complex and interconnected global challenges that cannot be addressed by even the most brilliant person working alone, nor by a single discipline, sector, or even nation. But this era also is providing us with unique new opportunities offered by advances in materials, in biotechnology and the life sciences, and importantly, here today, in high performance and cognitive computing, in data analytics, data visualization, and immersive technologies of all kinds, including very powerful tools for modeling, simulation, analytics, and in fact, collaboration, many of which you guys develop here and use here. Now, such challenges and such opportunities demand In fact, that we work together across the discipline sectors and even geographies. And so at Rensselaer, we get to serve as a great crossroads for such multifaceted endeavors, and we have the ability to bring people together from across the world, and of course across the nation. And we're doing this within a paradigm that we call the new Polytechnic, the new Polytechnic. Because the challenges and opportunities demand that a modern technological education be rooted in important disciplines, while sustaining fresh and unexpected collaborations. And that we actually use the very advanced technologies at our disposal, some of which we create, to unite a multiplicity of disciplines and perspectives, and that we educate the next generation of leaders for depth in their specific domains, because you do have to know something to do something, okay? But also for the breadth that allows them to perceive connections among domains, connections that may not appear to be there initially, or domains that initially appear unrelated. And so we have three attributes that we seek to develop in our students: intellectual agility, multicultural sophistication, and a true global view, if they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow that we intend them to be. And we expect them to address, and we do this as part of our education, to address the great challenges of our time, to use them in their work in business and government, in the military, in academia, and in the nonprofit arena, to change the world for the better. There are multiple pathways. And in a world in which technological, scientific, social, and environmental upheaval are a way of life, we consider resilience to be so significant that we have made it an undergirding attribute of all that we do. In fact, we have an institute-wide community theme this year at Rensselaer, and it's resilience. We refer to it as resilient leadership for a resilient world. And we have invited our faculty, our staff, and our students to join a public discourse of what makes for personal resilience and resilient leadership, and of the ways to then build resilience into our infrastructure, physical and social, and our systems. Now, I know that you are focused on excellence, or you wouldn't be here at the Boeing Leadership Center. So resilient, creative, empathetic, tenacious leaders with integrity is what I expect all of you to become, and I suspect you are, and to develop the people you lead along a similar path. Now, my own experience suggests that as you rise in your careers, it is beneficial to be prepared to encounter pivoting courses ahead. So you have to prepare for sudden shocks. You have to prepare for sudden moments of clarity, emerging from shifting corporate, national, or global frameworks, all of which you operate within. In fact, I don't know if these guys will tell you that, but I would encourage you to deliberately stray off the path that you've set for yourselves every now and then, if it promises to offer you a valuable new perspective and a broader context for what you do. And assume, and I assume that you assume this, that you have the capacity to learn and do a great deal, because you already are doing that, and so you do have that capacity. So let me close this way. You know, I've been very influenced, as I said, by my own parents. My father used to say Aim for the stars so that you can reach the treetops, and at least you'll get off the ground. In other words, if you do not aim high, you will not go far. So I just would say, try always to take the long view. Try always, which you have the opportunity to do within this context, to change the world for the better. And you will be leaders by definition, resilient leaders. So that's what I have to say. Let me go back to my question. What moment in your careers thus far has demanded the greatest degree of personal resilience? And how do you apply, or how can you apply, the flexibility and strength that you demonstrated in that instance to the windows that you soon will be stepping through? My closing statement. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to answer a question. Please. Well, what I'm trying to do is to institutionalize change at the university and to develop the next generation of leaders and to position the university to continue to do that for the next 100 years. But it rests with the first two. But I also want to do that in a way where our students have even greater awareness of global challenges and what I call intersecting vulnerabilities with cascading consequences, because I think that's how we all have to think. And so I'm trying to work with our leadership team to build that into everything that we do. And then through that, to build a leadership team for Rensselaer to leave behind when I'm long gone. What I'm trying to do. And so there are a number of specific things that relate to that, but it would take me 2 weeks to tell you. So. Other questions, please. I've always believed two things. One, that if you have your health and opportunity, you can do anything. But you do have to have confidence, integrity, and be resilient. Secondly, that vision is important. But you actually have to be both a visionary and a pragmatist. Because the vision thing alone doesn't allow you to accomplish anything. You have to understand for the given organization or the given situation how you translate that into demonstrable results. And then you have to care about the people you lead. It doesn't mean coddle them, but you do have to care about them. And so empathy is important. And in a global world, that's even more important. Please. That's an excellent question. And that is that one has to be results-oriented. Because in the end, any leader is going to be judged ultimately by what he or she accomplishes. So one has to be willing to be held accountable and to be measured relative to results. So if one gets results, that doesn't mean one doesn't fail every now and then, but that things get integrated over time. Then that helps to build confidence in what one is doing. You know, I learned that actually from the NRC. It's a hard job in its way. And so the problem, the challenge a leader always has is you cannot be so arrogant as to think you have all the answers. But at the same time, you can never lead if you second guess yourself all the time. And so in the end, you're going to be judged by whether you make more right decisions than wrong ones, and what kind of record you build. And so you have to, that's why resilience is important, and tenacity. Please. Well, there are 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and Rensselaer is ranked 41. A lot of that ranking has to do with relative wealth. And so we do not have the endowment of Harvard or Yale or Princeton. You know, any president worth his or her salt always asks alums for money. But having said that, tonight, no, but I'll talk to you later. Actually, you should look more carefully because, in fact, if you look in key areas of engineering, in mathematics, science, etc., Rensselaer is ranked very high in the top, 15 or 20 in many, many areas, particularly ones that relate to the things that I've talked about. Secondly, well, we are undertaking our next major capital campaign. And the real key is being able to support brilliant students who wish to come to Rensselaer. And that takes the money to provide financial aid. The kind of infrastructure that's required to offer the education that we provide is very expensive. And to be able to hire the best and retain the best faculty also takes a lot of money. And so it's not all about money, because what I've tried to show de facto in my remarks is that with careful planning and a real focus, there's a lot we can achieve. But in the end, one has to have that financial underpinning. But we don't try to play that game of, every president really does, but, of the absolute rankings, because what we look at is outcomes for our students. And we know what Rensselaer alums have done through the years. Some people are probably sitting here, but maybe you guys are pretty good. People do their thing with their smartphones and so on, sending your emails and so on. And so a lot of those technologies actually were developed by Rensselaer people. If you go lie in the sun, sunscreen. I could go on and on and on. And so in the end, the proof points have to do with what your graduates do and how they, and what kind of careers they build. And we stand with all the great universities, including my alma mater, MIT, in that regard. So, and each young person has to find the right place for him or herself. And, one wants to go to an excellent place, but within that, there are a lot of choices. So. Yes. Yes. Well, some of it has to do with continuing along pathways we've started. But we also have made a big effort in computational science and engineering, as I've said, with high performance computing, with data, broadly, big data, broadly writ, but particularly as it relates to data analytics, predictive analytics, the application across a broad spectrum from healthcare to the things that Boeing does. We also are looking at this unique nexus of the engineering and the physical and computational sciences with the social sciences, and even with art, because it is at that nexus that our ability to create systems, hardcore technological ones that more easily integrate with how humans think, behave, interact with technology, can be better designed and better utilized. Also, there are lots of things in fundamental science, basic science, where the beauty of what you see relates to fundamental properties. And so there's Nobel Prize winner Steven Weinberg, who talks about the fact that if certain theories lack a certain kind of symmetry, they're usually wrong. And that comports with what some of my experience has been. But you might say, well, what happens with chaos theory? But actually, there is a kind of patterning in that most people don't recognize, but it's there. Please. I turned down a job at IBM. I turned down the opportunity to continue as chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I've turned down the opportunity to be president of some other universities. I could go on. And I've turned down a number of boards, both in the business and the not-for-profit sector. In the end, for as much as I do and have had the privilege to do, one cannot do everything. So what I try to do is to ensure that I think that these opportunities are important, that they link to who I am and what my values are. And, while I'm president of Rensselaer, that they link to making me a better president there. Anyone else? Please. See, that's what you should have asked me. Well, let us say that we are rebuilding. But I will tell you this. Rensselaer has one of 3 engineers in the NFL, and one of only 3 folks in the NFL who've come from Division III football programs. So we have Andrew Franks, who is the starting kicker for the Miami Dolphins, who's a biomedical engineer, really good grades actually, who is, he's the starting kicker for the Miami Dolphins, and in his first game, he didn't miss one field goal and helped them win, because the goals he kicked, the points that added up, actually provided essentially the margin for the Dolphins to win. So there you have it. We're a football powerhouse. Please.
We always talk
Well, we think we turn out a pretty good product here. Their attributes are that they are brilliant, but they came in the door that way. They are well educated. We actually believe that. We've given them experiences to broaden their purview. And what I find is that they want to make a difference. And they don't shy away from working on hard things. What we're trying to do as a university is to strengthen the attributes they have, to make them even more intellectually agile, to start from their own disciplinary route, but be able to work across a broad intellectual milieu and to work with others in that arena. To be leaders, but to understand they can lead in multiple ways. You know, one can be a designated leader, but one can be a leader by virtue of how one influences others and gets them to move in a certain path. And given our world, and given where Boeing is and where it's going, the real multicultural sophistication and global view is very important, and I would hope that as part of your leadership development that the kind of assignments that they get would be structured to help provide that, but we're going to be doing more of that at the university ourselves. So I hope that's responsive. Please. When the NRC was on the cover of Time magazine, and the title was "Blowing the Whistle on Nuclear Safety," yeah, I thought I had made the wrong decision to go, because that kind of thing can ruin a career. Because if one is the head of the department or agency in an environment like Washington, one can get crucified. But then I decided that we had to change our regulatory approach, and that I had to try to do certain things fast, create credibility, and some things needed to be more embedded. And that was the point of changing the regulatory approach in a fundamental way. And so we actually shut down a nuclear power plant. What was the plant? It was in Connecticut, Millstone. Shut down for 2.5 years. So there was a lot of pressure from politicians, particularly the congressional delegation from Connecticut. And it's interesting because at that point, and it's probably still true, Connecticut was less well connected to the national grid than some other states. So it was harder for them to import power, electricity. So to have a plant, and when I say shut down a plant, it meant more than one reactor. And to have that much taken off the grid for that long is significant, and so they had to do a lot of other things. So that does make one wonder, you know, if one has done the right thing. But in the end, it was the right thing. But there was a lot of pressure, and I worried about it a lot. So, but, you know, once one makes the decision, one has to follow through. Well, thank you. And let me ask you this. Have you ever faced a similar situation? You know, the kind of situation you asked me about? Okay, the lady in front of you is shaking her head yes, so. Cool. What gave you the confidence to do that? You're resilient. What about you? You ever had that? No, the gentleman in front of you. Yeah.
So I thought you'd be quite buoyant about this, and I'm a buoyant person. I wasn't buoyant. I thought, how am I getting this time? Will I?
Well, thank you for sharing
And
that.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I appreciate that.
Surprised me, so.
Let me just get one over here, the gentleman in the blue shirt. Couple of blue shirts. What about the gentleman behind him in the pink? And then the young man up here in the light blue shirt. Sounds like you set sail across the North Atlantic, building the ship and assembling the crew at the same time. So let me just ask one of you young ladies, you have a story to share?
Probably left my
One else? I won't be the bad teacher and call on you. Thank all of you. Thank you very much.